My name is Rebecca. I was 16 years old when everything I thought I understood about my family quietly fell apart. I grew up in what most people would call a normal household: 2 parents, 2 daughters. From the outside, we looked fine, but inside our home, there was an unspoken hierarchy that everyone seemed to accept as natural. My older sister, Victoria, was 19 then. She was everything I wasn't: confident, socially magnetic, the kind of person who walked into a room and automatically became its center. She had perfect grades, a wide circle of friends, and this effortless way of making our parents beam with pride. When Victoria got accepted into her dream university, our parents threw her a celebration dinner. When she made the dean's list, they posted about it on social media. When she won a student leadership award, they framed the certificate and hung it in the living room. I was quieter, more reserved. I preferred books to parties, writing to socializing. I wasn't unpopular, just less visible. And my achievements, when they came, were acknowledged differently. A nod, "That's nice, honey," a brief mention at dinner before the conversation shifted back to Victoria's latest accomplishment. I want to be clear, I wasn't abused, I wasn't hated. My parents loved me. But love and attention aren't always distributed equally, and I had learned early on that in our family, there was a star and there was support staff. Victoria didn't seem to notice the imbalance, or maybe she did and simply accepted it as her natural place in the world. Either way, she moved through life with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned whether she mattered. I had questioned it, often, but I'd also learned to accept it as normal. I told myself it didn't bother me, that I was fine being the quiet one, the background presence, the sister who didn't need as much attention. I believed that for years. Until one afternoon, in front of 50 people, Victoria laughed at me, and I didn't say a word to stop her. It happened at the Hendersons' annual summer barbecue. Over 50 people were there. Extended family, my parents' colleagues, family friends, and a cluster of Victoria's university friends who always seemed to travel in a pack. I had just found out 2 weeks earlier that I'd been accepted into the Meridian Creative Writing Institute's summer program. It was competitive, only 30 high school students selected nationally. I'd spent months on my application, workshopping my submission piece, writing and rewriting my personal statement. When the acceptance email came, I cried in my room for 10 minutes straight. I hadn't told many people. It felt too precious, too fragile to broadcast. But my parents had mentioned it to a few friends, and that afternoon, Mrs. Henderson asked me about it in front of a group that had gathered near the drink table. "Rebecca, I heard you got into some writing program. That's wonderful." I felt my face warm with a mix of pride and shyness. "Yeah, it's a summer institute for creative writing. I'm really excited about it." Before I could say more, Victoria's laugh cut through the conversation. Not a small chuckle, a loud, performative laugh that made everyone turn to look at her. "Oh, Rebecca's little writing thing?" Victoria said, her voice dripping with amused condescension. "It's cute, but it's not like it's a real accomplishment. It's basically a participation program. You know, one of those things where everyone who applies gets in." The group laughed, not meanly, just casually, as if Victoria had made a clever observation they all agreed with. I stood there, frozen. My throat tightened. I wanted to correct her, to explain that only 30 students out of hundreds were accepted, that it wasn't a participation program at all. But the words wouldn't come. I looked at my parents. They were standing a few feet away, within earshot. My mother smiled awkwardly and looked down at her plate. My father cleared his throat and started talking to someone about golf. Neither of them said a word. Victoria had already moved on, laughing about something else with her friends. Mrs. Henderson gave me a sympathetic look, but didn't push the topic further. I walked away quietly, my face burning, my chest tight. The conversation continued behind me, as if nothing had happened, and I didn't correct her. I didn't say a single word. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't slam doors or demand an apology. I just went quiet. In the days after the gathering, I kept replaying the moment in my head. Victoria's laugh, The way people had joined in so easily, as if agreeing with her was the natural response. The casual cruelty of it. Not intentional, maybe, but devastating nonetheless. What hurt most wasn't just the public dismissal, it was the silence that followed. No one brought it up. Not Victoria, not my parents, not a single person who had been there. It was as if the moment had never happened. Victoria went back to talking about her graduate school applications at dinner. My parents asked her opinion on everything from politics to what color to repaint the kitchen. Life continued exactly as it always had, except I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started questioning myself in ways I hadn't before. Had I overreacted? Was my writing program actually insignificant compared to Victoria's accomplishments? Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been taking myself too seriously. Maybe the real problem was that I was too sensitive, too easily hurt, too desperate for validation I didn't deserve. This is what dismissal does. It doesn't just hurt you in the moment, it makes you doubt whether you have the right to be hurt at all. I noticed my parents seemed almost relieved that I hadn't made a scene. There was this unspoken gratitude in the way they moved past it, as if I had done them a favor by staying silent. And maybe I had. Conflict was uncomfortable. Confrontation would have disrupted the family's carefully maintained image of harmony. So I made it easier for everyone. I withdrew. I started spending more time in my room. When my family gathered for dinner, I was there physically, but I stopped contributing to conversations. I answered questions with 1 or 2 words. I stopped sharing updates about my day. I stopped asking about theirs. I became even more invisible than I already was. But here's what no one noticed. Beneath that withdrawal, something was changing. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, colder, a kind of clarity I had never felt before. I started to see my family differently, not with bitterness, but with the sharp, uncomfortable awareness of someone who had just woken up in the middle of a play and realized they'd been performing a role they never auditioned for. I had spent 16 years trying to earn a place in a family where my sister's presence was celebrated and mine was simply tolerated. And for the first time, I started to wonder, what would happen if I stopped trying? I stopped trying to be seen, but in my silence, I started seeing. When you step back from a system you've been part of your entire life, you notice things you were too close to recognize before. Patterns, behaviors, the small, repeated actions that build the structure of a family's reality. I started watching Victoria differently, not with resentment, but with the detached curiosity of someone studying a specimen under glass. Her confidence, I realized, wasn't as solid as it appeared. It was performative, fragile. It needed constant reinforcement from external sources, compliments, awards, social media validation, our parents' pride. I watched her check her phone compulsively, measuring her worth in likes and comments. I noticed how anxious she became when a professor gave her critical feedback, how she'd spend hours obsessing over it, needing reassurance from everyone around her that she was exceptional. Victoria didn't know who she was without applause. I also started noticing my parents more clearly. They weren't cruel people. They genuinely loved both of us, but they had invested so much of their identity in having a successful, impressive daughter that they had become addicted to the validation Victoria's achievements brought them. They didn't celebrate her because they were proud. They celebrated her because her success reflected well on them. Disrupting that narrative would have been uncomfortable, so they didn't. Victoria's friends were the same. They orbited her like satellites, drawn to her charisma and confidence. But I noticed that none of them really knew her, not deeply. They knew the performance, the charming, witty, effortlessly successful version of Victoria. But when she was struggling, when she needed real support, they offered surface-level reassurance and then changed the subject. She was surrounded by people, but she was alone in the ways that mattered. Around that time, Victoria started applying to graduate programs, prestigious ones. She talked about it constantly. Her essays, her interviews, her anxiety about whether she'd get in. She needed everything to go perfectly. Her entire identity was wrapped up in this next achievement, this next validation that she was special. I watched all of this unfold with a strange, cold clarity. I didn't plan anything. I wasn't scheming or plotting revenge, but I was beginning to understand something fundamental about the system I had been living in. My family's dynamic wasn't built on love or even fairness. It was built on performance and image. Victoria performed, and everyone applauded. I had tried to perform too, in my own quieter way, but my performances were never the right kind. They didn't generate the same energy, the same pride, the same social currency. So I had become invisible. But here's what I realized in those quiet weeks of observation. I had been playing a supporting role in someone else's story. I had spent 16 years trying to earn a place in a narrative where I was never meant to be the protagonist, and I didn't have to keep doing that. I made a decision, not a loud one, not dramatic. I would stop participating. I didn't announce it. I didn't sit my family down and explain that things were going to be different now. I simply began to withdraw the invisible labor I had been providing for years without ever realizing I was providing it. I stopped trying to impress my parents. When they asked about school, I gave short, polite answers. When they talked about their day, I listened but didn't engage deeply. I stopped seeking their approval for my choices, stopped waiting for them to notice my efforts. I stopped attending family events I wasn't required to attend. Sunday brunches with extended family, casual dinners with my parents' friends, Victoria's university events where I was expected to show up and be the supportive younger sister. I declined politely, citing homework or other commitments. When Victoria talked about her graduate school applications, which was constant, I listened, but I didn't offer the encouragement and support she had always casually expected from me. I didn't read her essays. I didn't reassure her when she spiraled into anxiety. I didn't tell her she was amazing and that any program would be lucky to have her. I just said, "I'm sure you'll figure it out." A few months later, I won a regional writing award. It was significant: a cash prize, publication in an anthology, recognition from authors I admired, the kind of achievement I would have once rushed home to share, desperate for my family's acknowledgement. I didn't do any of this out of spite. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply done offering pieces of myself to people who had never valued what I was giving. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't slam doors or demand an apology. I just went quiet. In the days after the gathering, I kept replaying the moment in my head. Victoria's laugh, the way people had joined in so easily, as if agreeing with her was the natural response. The casual cruelty of it, not intentional maybe, but devastating nonetheless. What hurt most wasn't just the public dismissal, it was the silence that followed. No one brought it up, not Victoria, not my parents, not a single person who had been there. It was as if the moment had never happened. Victoria went back to talking about her graduate school applications at dinner. My parents asked her opinion on everything from politics to what color to repaint the kitchen. Life continued exactly as it always had, except I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started questioning myself in ways I hadn't before. Had I overreacted? Was my writing program actually insignificant compared to Victoria's accomplishments? Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been taking myself too seriously. Maybe the real problem was that I was too sensitive, too easily hurt, too desperate for validation I didn't deserve. This is what dismissal does. It doesn't just hurt you in the moment, it makes you doubt whether you have the right to be hurt at all. I noticed my parents seemed almost relieved that I hadn't made a scene. There was this unspoken gratitude in the way they moved past it, as if I had done them a favor by staying silent. And maybe I had. Conflict was uncomfortable. Confrontation would have disrupted the family's carefully maintained image of harmony. So I made it easier for everyone. I withdrew. I started spending more time in my room. When my family gathered for dinner, I was there physically, but I stopped contributing to conversations. I answered questions with 1 or 2 words. I stopped sharing updates about my day. I stopped asking about theirs. I became even more invisible than I already was. But here's what no one noticed. Beneath that withdrawal, something was changing. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, colder, a kind of clarity I had never felt before. I started to see my family differently, not with bitterness, but with the sharp, uncomfortable awareness of someone who had just woken up in the middle of a play and realized they'd been performing a role they never auditioned for. I had spent 16 years trying to earn a place in a family where my sister's presence was celebrated and mine was simply tolerated. And for the first time, I started to wonder, what would happen if I stopped trying? I stopped trying to be seen, but in my silence, I started seeing. When you step back from a system you've been part of your entire life, you notice things you were too close to recognize before. Patterns, behaviors, the small repeated actions that build the structure of a family's reality. I started watching Victoria differently, not with resentment, but with the detached curiosity of someone studying a specimen under glass. Her confidence, I realized, wasn't as solid as it appeared. It was performative, fragile. It needed constant reinforcement from external sources, compliments, awards, social media validation, our parents' pride. I watched her check her phone compulsively, measuring her worth in likes and comments. I noticed how anxious she became when a professor gave her critical feedback, how she'd spend hours obsessing over it, needing reassurance from everyone around her that she was still exceptional. My presence, my support, my quiet reliability, these things had been taken for granted because I had offered them freely, without conditions, without expecting anything in return. I was done offering them for free. And something strange happened. I felt lighter. The desperate need for my family's approval began to fade. I stopped measuring my worth by their attention. I stopped feeling like I was failing some invisible test every time Victoria outshone me. I started investing my energy elsewhere. I built deeper friendships with people at school who actually saw me, who valued my thoughts and my writing. I focused on my own goals without the background noise of comparison. I created a life that didn't revolve around being seen by people who had spent years looking past me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was living for myself, not for applause, not for validation, just for me. The family didn't notice the shift immediately, but they would. Victoria's golden life began to tarnish. Her graduate program was harder than anything she'd faced before. The professors were demanding, the workload was crushing, and for the first time in her life, being charming and confident wasn't enough to carry her through. She started struggling, visibly. Her friend circle, the friends who had always orbited her, drawn to her shine, didn't know how to handle it. They were good at celebrating her, at basking in her reflected glow, but when she needed real support, when she called her crying about a failed presentation or a harsh critique from a professor, they offered shallow reassurances and changed the subject. They didn't know how to be there for someone who wasn't winning. So Victoria started reaching out to me more frequently, not because she suddenly valued our relationship, not because she'd reflected on how she'd treated me, but because she needed something. And I had always been the person who gave it to her without asking for anything in return. "Rebecca, can you look at this paper? I'm really stressed about it." "I'm working on my own assignments. I'm sure you'll figure it out." "I just need someone to talk to. Can I come to your room?" "I have plans. Maybe another time."
Why are you being so cold? I'm really struggling here. I'm not being cold, I'm just busy with my own life. Each interaction was polite, distant, neutral. But for Victoria, who had spent her entire life receiving unconditional support, especially from me, neutrality felt like rejection. She began to spiral in ways I'd never seen before. She second-guessed herself constantly. She stayed up late redoing assignments, convinced they weren't good enough. She stopped posting on social media as much, stopped going out with friends, stopped carrying herself with that easy confidence that had always defined her. She was unraveling, and I watched it happen with a strange, detached calm. Meanwhile, my own life was quietly flourishing in ways no one at home knew about. I had been accepted into an early entry college program for exceptional students. I had built a portfolio that had caught the attention of a published author who agreed to mentor me. I was writing consistently, growing as a writer, building connections with people who saw my potential and wanted to nurture it. I didn't mention any of this at home. My parents finally noticed something was deeply wrong. They called a family meeting one Sunday afternoon. The four of us sat in the living room, me, Victoria, and our parents. The air felt heavy with unspoken tension. "We need to talk," my mother said, her voice carefully measured. "Rebecca, you've become so distant lately. We're worried about you." The framing was concern, but I heard the subtext clearly. Why aren't you holding this family together anymore? Why have you stopped playing your role?
I looked at them calmly. I'm not distant. I'm just focusing on my own goals now. I thought that's what you wanted for all of us. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Of course we want that, but family is important too. You're barely here anymore. I'm here, I said. I just don't participate the way I used to. My father leaned forward, trying a different approach. Rebecca, family comes first. We support each other. That's what families do. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Then I said, quietly but clearly, when was the last time any of you asked about my college program? Silence. When was the last time you asked about my writing, or how I'm doing, or what I'm working on? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. I've been accepted into an early entry college program. I have a mentor now, a published author who's working with me on my portfolio. I won a regional writing award 3 months ago. Did any of you know that? More silence. Victoria was looking down at her hands. My parents looked at each other, uncomfortable. We didn't, my mother started. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm just answering your question. You asked why I've become distant. I haven't. I've just stopped waiting for you to notice me. My father tried again. We've always been proud of you, Rebecca. Maybe, but you've never shown it the way you show it with Victoria. And that's okay. I've accepted it. But I'm not going to keep giving pieces of myself to people who don't see them as valuable. Victoria's head snapped up. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but she just looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, then looked away again. The meeting ended awkwardly. No one knew what to say. My parents seemed caught between defensiveness and guilt, unable to fully land on either. I went back to my room. That night, I heard them arguing in low voices through the walls. I couldn't make out most of it, but I caught fragments. We should have paid more attention. I didn't realize. She's right. But no one came to my room. No one apologized. And I realized I didn't need them to anymore. The damage wasn't something an apology could fix. It was structural, built over years. In the months that followed, the family tried to adjust. Victoria graduated from her program. She made it through, but the experience had fundamentally changed her. She was no longer the untouchable golden child who moved through life with effortless confidence. She was just a person trying to figure things out, like everyone else. Humbled, uncertain, more careful with her words. My parents made small, awkward attempts to reconnect with me. My mother started asking about my writing, though the questions felt forced at first, like she was reading from a script she didn't quite understand.
My father attended a ceremony where I was honored for my work. He sat in the back, but he came. Afterward, he told me he was proud of me, and I could see he meant it. I appreciated the gestures. I really did. But the damage was done. Not in a dramatic, irreparable way, just in the quiet, permanent way that happens when you realize a relationship isn't what you thought it was. I wasn't angry anymore. That had faded. But I also wasn't available in the way I used to be. I had built a life that didn't depend on their validation, and I wasn't willing to dismantle it just because they had finally noticed I existed. Victoria reached out to me a few months after she graduated, not through a text or at the dinner table, but in person. She came to my room one evening and asked if we could talk. She didn't make a grand speech. She just said quietly, "I'm sorry for how I treated you, for not seeing you. I was selfish, and I was dismissive, and you didn't deserve that." I looked at her. She looked tired, older, more real than she'd ever looked before.
"Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." She nodded. "Can we try again? Start over?" "Maybe," I said, "but it's going to take time. Trust doesn't just come back because you apologize." "I know," she said, and she left it at that. We didn't become close again overnight. We might never be close the way sisters are supposed to be, but we were learning to exist in the same space without pretending everything was fine. It wasn't closure. It was just reality. And I didn't set out to teach anyone a lesson. I didn't plan some elaborate revenge or carefully orchestrate a moment of reckoning. I simply stopped participating in a dynamic that was hurting me. But in doing so, I learned something I hadn't expected to learn. You don't have to correct people who underestimate you. You don't have to prove yourself to people who refuse to see you. You just have to stop depending on their approval. That realization was the most freeing thing I'd ever experienced. For 16 years, I had measured my worth by my family's recognition, by whether my parents noticed my achievements, by whether Victoria saw me as an equal, by whether I could finally earn the same kind of celebration and pride that came so easily for her. And when I stopped measuring myself that way, when I stopped waiting for validation that was never going to come, I discovered something powerful. My worth had never been determined by their recognition in the first place. I had always been valuable. I had always been talented. I had always mattered. They just hadn't been looking. I'm not angry at Victoria anymore. I'm not angry at my parents. Anger requires a level of investment I no longer have. I'm just separate. Some relationships can't be fully repaired, and that's okay. Not everything broken needs to be fixed. Not every family dynamic needs to be salvaged. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is accept the distance and build a life that doesn't depend on people changing. I've done that now. I'm in college, studying what I love, surrounded by people who see me clearly. People who ask about my writing, who celebrate my successes, who show up for me the way I used to show up for others without reciprocation. I've built a life on my own terms. Victoria and I are civil now. We text occasionally. She's doing better. She finished her program, found her footing again. My parents have made small efforts to connect, and I appreciate them. But the relationship is different now, lighter, less entangled. I think about that day at the barbecue sometimes, the moment Victoria laughed at me in front of 50 people, the moment I stood there, silent and humiliated, and didn't correct her. I didn't correct my sister that day, and I never needed to. The truth corrected itself. Sometimes that's enough.